until I heard about crypto, which was in 2017, where I realized, okay, hang on, actually, there is something that allows you to do the whole thing differently, where you don't need to give the money away to someone else, where you can actually take care of it yourself, where you own it, and where you can choose.
Bravery on, stay aware, stay ahead, stay on. News flows, AI scanning, markets breathe, blockchains running.
Hi, my name is Yuri B, your very own Web3 wanderer, blockchain storyteller, and AI enthusiast. And today I'm so fortunate to have Florian Ehrbar of OnchainLabs. Now, we've had a conversation before, a little bit more about talent, a little bit more about career, but today we're going to be talking about the industry as a whole. So, for those that don't know, the blockchain industry, there's different types of niches, different types of facets, and we're very fortunate to have Florian here to talk about RWAs and tokenization in general. But before that, Florian, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Yuri.
Yeah, definitely. Since we last talked, like maybe we could follow up a little bit, like it's Token 2049, all the events. So what's been going on with on-chain?
Oh, it's been super exciting. I feel like there are a lot more people realizing that, RWA really is a thing. It's been a narrative for a long time, and there was a hype around it in, say, the crypto circles. But now that the headlines are out there, Larry Fink has been talking about it again, how they really need to speed up and tokenize more and faster. And that opens up the door for a lot of really interesting conversations for companies like us.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so before we talk a little bit further, let's go a little bit back and start once again. I know we asked you some personal questions last time to get like a little good narrative about like your upbringing and your thoughts on things. But we'll ask you another one again, which was, could we talk about your early experience or early exposure to money and technology at the same time? Like when was the first time as a kid you learned about the concept of money and how did you learn about it? What are some concepts that stayed with you even as you grow older? And of course, technology at the same time. Like, what were some of your favorite techs, or what were some of your favorite technologies or stuff that you used earlier?
Wow, okay, and it's a really interesting question. Quite a big topic. I think a lot of people would relate to the fact that, and look, I don't know how it is like in other parts of the world, but at least in Western Europe, it's quite common as a kid that you get a presentation at a school where a bank would like tell you about their savings account, and then you get like a child account in your local bank, and that's how they teach you about money, right? So your first exposure as a kid is just that you get this, account which somehow is a number that your parents manage. But you don't really get a say, you don't really get any real ownership, and it doesn't really feel like actual money. So I think, as most of us, our initial exposure is with fiat, with the physical money that we can hold in our pockets. And then for me, it changed obviously as I was responsible to manage my own money. I started earning salaries, and then you figure out, okay, now I actually got to take care how where I keep that. But it's always been like a money in, money out kind of situation, and I wasn't really worried about it until I heard about crypto, which was in 2017, where I realized, okay, hang on, actually, there is something that allows you to do the whole thing differently, where you don't need to give the money away to someone else, where you can actually take care of it yourself, where you own it, and where you can choose, how to save it, where to save it, and actually that there are opportunities for you to also make money. And I think that was probably how it all changed. Where I realized, man, I can put money into Web3 and take money out of Web3, and it's just as real as what I so far have been taught, as what's the real money. So I think that mindset shift, realizing that this magic internet money is actually quite real, that was a big moment. And I remember the first time when I, significantly cashed out. It's a while ago now. Um, just how bizarre it felt to then see that number show up in my bank account, and it was just as real as any other money.
That's really interesting. 2017 is still pretty early when it comes to crypto. What was the industry like back then? Like, I think that was like before the IPO craze, or like during the IPO craze, or what was it like during that time?
Yeah, it was just around the time when ICOs were a really big deal. And for me, my biggest concern as like a newcomer to crypto in 2017 was the how to get it out again. I think that was my biggest worry. And it would be interesting to hear how it is for people today because I don't know what the concerns are of people onboarding today. But back then it was, buying crypto was possible. There were a lot of ways, but then how to sell it? That was always my question. Like, what if I buy, back then I could have bought a Bitcoin for like 15 grand, right? And I was like, if I buy a Bitcoin and I sell it again, how do I get the money back into my bank account? And so I spent a lot of time researching what exists in terms of off-ramps. And it was around the time when Binance launched. So I was literally there just around the time when Binance came out with their app. I lived in Australia at the time, and so I was waiting for it to be in the Australian App Store. And I think I had to go on a whitelist first before I could even get into it because there were so many people signing up. And yeah, that really then changed the game because it made trading a lot easier. Kraken was already available, but it wasn't as easy to get into it from Australia. And there were some local options, which is how I ended up actually making my first investments.
So Binance and centralized exchanges still played a huge part of that adaptation to crypto, especially with the off-ramp and on-ramp stuff. Um, Talking a little bit more about your industry, since it kind of requires a TradFi approach. How did you enter the tokenization slash RWA approach industry?
It all started with the fact that I thought there has to be a way that physical objects can get connected to the blockchain because there are many, especially high value items that would benefit from having a record on the blockchain. If you think about a car, but also any other high value items that you want to, keep safe and you want to track them, it just makes sense to keep the metadata of those objects on the blockchain. And so I was thinking, okay, how do we do that? Like, where do we even begin with the connection between the physical world and the blockchain world? And so I started looking into what are the business opportunities and like what kind of products are we talking about? Um, and then the next point obviously was, well, okay, if we connect items with the blockchain and store the data of them on chain, how do you interact with it? And that's when the conversations about wallets started. Because if you have a luxury car and the car's metrics are tracked on chain, the service history, the insurance, all those things, the car owner is probably not going to download MetaMask to check the car service history. And so our answer was, all right, we have to build a wallet that feels like Web2 because people are used to accessing infrastructure where you just have a website and you log in and then you have your account there. You manage most of, your assets nowadays that way. And so I said, all right, we're gonna have to do it the same way. So if you want to manage your assets on chain, it has to be a URL, email, password, PIN kind of setup. And that's what we ended up doing.
Now let's talk a little bit more about on-chain itself. So tokenization is quite interesting because it's kind of merging, like as we talked about, like the TradFi and like now with modern technologies and crypto and the blockchain and everything. But what's really interesting is like the GTM approach to that, because it feels like such a unique market. And well, we had this conversation before that like there's a huge supply of people trying to bring things on chain, but like what is the demand? So what are maybe some GTM strategies that on chain does for
Yeah,
tokenization?
I'm quite passionate about this topic because I think there are a lot of people who feel like, all right, RWA is a hype, let's build some infrastructure for it. And then what they do is they set up what they call protocol. At the end of the day, it's like a minting mechanism where you mint tokens. Because ultimately, if you think about it, what is RWA? RWA is nothing other than creating a token. So whether it's an ERC20 or 721, you create a token that represents the physical assets or even the virtual assets that you're tokenizing. And so if you set up a platform that can mint tokens, you can call this RWA infrastructure. And because it's relatively easy to do if you know how to code, there are a lot of people who offer these kind of services. So that's why I think there is an oversupply of people offering RWA infrastructure, but there are not enough people who really do the end-to-end process of tokenization. Because if you talk to people who have assets to tokenize, and there are people out there who do, the first point is always education. The amount of time that we spend educating people on what it really means to tokenize, because it's still not understood, especially if you go to the more traditional asset managers. They don't understand the benefits of tokenization and also what it really means. So we spend a lot of time educating people on how to actually set up the business model. So for me, the first step when you talk about GTM is obviously you identify your ideal clients and the type of assets that you would like to tokenize, and there are a lot of differences too. And then you figure out, all right, if we tokenize this specific type of asset, what are our possibilities that we want to offer based on the jurisdictions that we're working with? And then from there, you want to figure out, all right, how do we actually create a business model that really works? Because if you're tokenizing real estate and you don't calculate your yield properly, you end up, creating something where, from an ecosystem perspective, something's got to collapse. And being able to set that mechanism up is something that should be core of what you're offering, because your clients obviously want to make money, you want to make money, and also the people who invest in RWAs want to make money. So if everybody wants to make money, who is going to pay for the fees? And so all that is something you have to think through when you offer somebody a tokenization service. And that's what I think is probably what's missing in our industry. A lot of people who know tech, tech is the fun part. It's code, it's ones and zeros. But then if you think about the entire the ecosystem that you're creating, that's the challenges that we're facing. And I think for us as OnchainLabs and our GTM, that's what we want to do. So we want to be able to offer that end-to-end service. We have people in our team that come from the Web 2 world that speak more Web 2 than Web 3. And that actually helps us because they also challenge what we sometimes set up. Because I'm a Web 3 guy, for me, that all makes sense and it's logical. But if I then go to some of my team members who aren't in that space and I tell them, hey guys, here's my idea, let's do this and that, they say, translate it again. I do not understand what you're doing. And then we figure out that actually, yeah, our product probably needs some reshaping so that then the everyday person actually understands what we're doing. And ultimately, that is the goal. We want to be able to create, real world asset tokenization for people that aren't familiar with Web3. Because if you think about what is RWA, it's tokenizing assets that we already know. And one of the most common topics is always gold, tokenizing gold. Sure. So if you have a gold token and you want to sell this to people who like to invest in gold, it's probably not crypto people. And therefore, you have to build the infrastructure and your platform in a way that the gold people understand it because they want to buy the gold coin. The crypto people, they already know how to get, there is Tether Gold, there's a lot of gold tokens that you can invest in. But if you are creating a new one and you have a specific target audience, build your platform so that they can use it. And that is, I think, part of what you should consider when you set up your GTM, because otherwise you're going to fail.
Let's talk a little bit deeper about that because education is usually known as one of the most expensive forms of campaigns because you have to convert the you have to like literally onboard a new audience and convert a whole new market into potential customers. What are maybe some campaigns or successful approaches or insights you might have about that conversion? How you guys do it at Onchain? How you've had success with those educational campaigns?
Yeah, I think for us the biggest say moment was when we realized that what we're building is B2B2C. Because then you don't do B2C education, you're actually doing B2B education, and then you work with your B2B clients to educate their clients, which are the Cs. And so our approach really is that education is part of our pre-sale. So first we find our targets, we find our ideal clients, we start talking to them. When there is interest, then we kick off the educational side of things. So we don't have to go and just, put education out there blindly, hoping somebody's going to pick it up. Obviously, we do, social media posts and a lot of content that comes out on LinkedIn and X that we do in that kind of educational style. But that's more to show that we know how to do that and that we can educate people. But ultimately, in terms of our BD strategy, it's talk to people first who have an interest or who have heard about it, and then figure out what's their level of knowledge and how do we target them with some educational material to then set up something that works. I had an example actually yesterday. I had a 45-minute call with somebody who reads a lot about Web3 and tokenization, but he's from the AI space, so he's an AI genius, but hasn't really spent a lot of time looking into Web3. And so he had this idea to tokenize a certain commodity. And I told him, look, what you were thinking makes sense in general, but for your specific case, we have to go a bit deeper. And so we spent these 45 minutes going through all the aspects of it. And by the end, he understood. And we actually had a really cool idea. And we pivoted from tokenizing the commodity to tokenizing the IP of the company that's distributing the commodity. Um, but this is the process you have to go through with the client or potential clients you're talking to, is to figure out, well, what's the actual model that makes sense? And so, yeah, for me, when I say education, it's more about working out, what is the actual RWA that we're talking about, and then how do we build the ecosystem before committing to, okay, this is how we're going to do it, and then you can't find liquidity in the market.
Wow, that's really interesting, and I'd love to hear more about that. But right now, maybe talking about the wider market, because there's a lot of industries, or basically, when you talk about RWA, almost anything can become an RWA. And I know we had this conversation before. You mentioned how, let's say, basketball cards could turn into an RWA, but it also depends on the market. So maybe we would love your personal insights on what are some industries that have somewhat of a higher likelihood or more of a market that could enter RWA versus industries that have maybe a less likelihood of success.
I think generally speaking, it's markets that already generate yield, right? That's the obvious ones. So that's why real estate is such a big one, because real estate right now is hard to access if you're on the other side of the globe. And so through tokenizing real estate, you can make it possible for anyone anywhere in the world to purchase your real estate tokens and then participate in the yield that's being generated. And whether that's through, construction and sales or simple rental yields, there are a lot of different models that you can do. And particularly real estate is such a fragmented market if you look at it from a global perspective, where in some parts of the world, the yields are really high, in other parts it's low. Same with construction costs. There are so many differences, and it takes a lot of local knowledge to understand if I want to build a project in Cyprus or build a project in Bali or build a project in South Africa, you know, if you can figure out a way to bring these kind of projects into a platform and sell it as an RWA, you're actually creating a lot of value for institutional investors who don't want to go through obtaining that local knowledge and figuring out, okay, what do I have to look at if I want to build a project in Cyprus? So these kind of use cases make a lot of sense, and there will be a lot more happening in that space very soon, and already is obviously. And the UAE is paving the way with making it possible to tokenize real estate directly. But then also exotic assets, because there are a lot of assets that can also generate really cool stories, and aren't as easy to say sell, but they still benefit from transparency. So I always use the example of forests, because if you're a forest owner, you're also generating yield because you're literally growing your product that you can sell, and you can calculate that. And I worked with some people that already do this, but on an institutional basis, and they're just creating syndicates where you can invest in a fraction of a forest. But they haven't done it on chain. And said, guys, let's put this thing on chain because you open up a whole new sales channel, and they loved it. So those kind of assets, I think they will have a really big future as well, especially because then you can also build a much more interesting marketing story. Because if you're tokenizing a fund, the marketing story is the same as what the fund already does right now. Because whether it's a fund token or a simple fund investment in a traditional sense, the story you tell and the way you market it to your audience is pretty similar. But if you do it for an exotic asset like a tree, if I want to sell you a tree, like I've got a whole book full of ideas of how I can do that.
We also want to learn maybe a bit more about the on-chain labs process of turning something into an RWA. So do you find these assets that already are, as you said, like have yield or like assets that would likely do better as an RWA, or are you discovered by certain people with assets that want to turn something into an RWA? You mentioned the conversation earlier with an AI guy, and you were able to come up with the IP as the actual RWA instead of maybe an agent or the end product. So could you walk us through that process?
In terms of how these cases come to us, it's usually through our network. And because I travel a lot, I meet a lot of people, I talk to them, and it's surprising, the things that come out when you feel passionate about a certain topic. And because I'm so passionate about the RWA, people come to me with their ideas and they want to, figure out a way, how can we do that? And hey, I know this guy who does that. Sometimes things sound crazy in the beginning, but when you think about it, suddenly you make something happen. Like the IP story is one of them, but a much more crazy story was a conversation I had with a guy who is creating telemetry items or like measuring systems for cattle farms. And so we ended up talking how you could tokenize a cow, right? It's a totally bizarre concept when you think about it. But actually, there is a financial product that you can create out of this. And then I found there are already people doing this again in the TradFi space. There are ways that you can institutionally invest into a cow. Obviously, they don't sell it like that, but ultimately, it's what it is. And those are the conversations that at the moment bring all those cases to us. So it's literally just having a lot of passion, and we have the benefit of regulations in Switzerland make it easy for us to, tokenize, because there is the classifications of the tokens. And with that as a starting point, it's also easier for me to explain to people what's possible and what not, because that's also something that a lot of people don't quite understand yet. And when you can talk with confidence about the legal side of things, that already takes away a lot of the concerns a lot of people have.
So I just want to ask you straight up, like, where does the creativity come in terms of tokenization, finding unique tokenization use cases? Because right now this conversation is like really changing my perspective on RWAs because I've met a lot of RWA guys, and the only thing I've heard is real estate commodities, and I think very, very, very traditional um approaches to things. So how do you stay creative in a space that other people would look as very, very traditional?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my brain operates in strange ways sometimes. I have this logical ability to think about use cases, but still a very entrepreneurial, business-like brain. And so combining these two things just makes it possible that you look at a cattle farm and you realize, hey, hang on, behind that cow that's walking on the grass that's currently growing and will end up producing something, there are numbers. So I am a numbers guy. I'm very logical, but at the same time I also see how things correlate and how things come together. And I think if you combine that, if you combine the business logic and the business mind with what's actually happening in the economy, that's where RWA is happening. And I think probably because, like I said, I feel very passionate about this. I feel like this industry has so much more to offer. The blockchain makes sense. The blockchain is such a logical thing, right? And people sometimes overthink it, but at the end of the day, having a layer online that allows you to own things and to transfer valuable items, that itself enables so many new use cases that we don't even need to look further.
Definitely. I think it's like a mix of entrepreneurial and at the same time, of course, understanding of the space. Talking a little bit more about creativity, because there's been definitely a lot of experimentation in the space. And like aside from tokenization, I think it's also like stable coins are in the discussion. And of course, like AI and stuff like that. What are maybe some other advancements or fields in the space right now that you're kind of excited about aside from tokenization and RWA?
I think wallet technology, and I'm really surprised that I say this, but wallets are the key. At the end of the day, if you want to make the blockchain accessible and easy to use, it's all about the wallet because that's how you interact with the blockchain. And I think everybody knows that ultimately the blockchain has to disappear. It has to be something in the background. It's just like HTTPS, like nobody actually cares about how it works, it just works. And the blockchain has to be the same. It has to be there as infrastructure that enables your business to operate. Um, but ultimately, for the end user, it's the wallet that creates that kind of connection. And so we have to spend a lot more time to optimize wallet infrastructure and to embed wallets in our existing systems. And also work on the connection between your payment methods. And that's obviously why Stripe has purchased Privy, because they've seen that and they know that, and they can tell that this is where they need to be if they want to keep, the position in the market. And that's where we're positioning ourselves with OnchainLabs too, is we want to be in that space where we make wallets easier to use, but we also integrate wallets with on-ramps, with off-ramps, and we gotta make those intersections easier with a lot less friction. It's crazy how much friction there still is. Even if you try to optimize, there's still so many points where things can fail, and payments are a tricky space because it's a legacy system that's been built with a lot of features and security layers. And I think that the integration between, say, card payments and crypto, it's still not been solved, even though, there are the big players like MoonPay and Transact that are trying hard. But if the banks block the payment because they think, oh, it's crypto, it's dangerous, it's a scam, there's nothing you can do, right? So there's like the whole end-to-end story that still has to be figured out so that we can actually make it easy for people to buy RWAs.
Okay, I also want to ask maybe this question about your views on the industry as a whole, because I think, well, in at Token 2049, something different was going on with the crowd. I felt personally there were a lot of TradFi and family offices and people from traditional backgrounds that were going there, and the participation of actual institutions and corporate people, and a lot of people from family offices that had no idea what crypto was, and they were going there to actually learn about the industry as a whole. So hopefully that also bridges, as you were talking about the on-ramping and the off-ramping, and like the friction between in the payment space. But maybe what are some of your thoughts on the direction that we're taking with like a lot of these traditional finance people starting to enter the space?
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I had the same impression. It felt like at the main event, it was all the new people who want to learn about the space, like you said. And then at the side events was the actual crypto people because they don't go to the main event anymore, right? And so it was quite an interesting atmosphere being surrounded by these people who are like, hey, I heard about crypto and I just booked a ticket to come here because that's the biggest event. So I want to learn about it. And it's great to see the interest, and it's obviously great to be able to have those kind of conversations. But I think we still have to work together also within Web3 to reduce the friction. Like what I said before about, making all the payment rails easier, and creating infrastructure from an end-to-end perspective that's more seamless. We still have to stick together within Web3 as well and say, hey guys, okay, what are we doing? Like who's doing which part, and how can we make it that for those people who are now coming to the conferences, the experience actually feels easy and seamless. So I don't know if the masses coming is gonna help. Obviously, it's gonna help in a sense that we can feel the urgency. Like I literally have conversations with clients that tell me, look, your product works, but my card didn't go through. And so that's why I feel like it's not working, right? Because this is not my fault. I cannot help you if your bank is declining a payment, but for them, it feels like it's not working. And so I feel like those kind of friction points obviously get louder if there are more people who have the pain. And in that sense, I think it's a good thing that there is an influx of new people who will also bring new perspectives and help us actually see where the challenges are so we can work on solutions.
Yeah, definitely. And that seems really frustrating with like everything's okay and their card itself didn't go through. I think that's it's usually one of the hardest things when dealing with, I think, the non Web 2 business or integrating your Web 3 business into like a Web 2 environment. Speaking a little bit more about the future, how do you envision us going forward? Maybe once that choke point is solved or once that bottle point is solved. Because right now, I think I do agree with you that like a lot of the friction happens all the way back to the payment side. And if we could just fix that, I think the industry would really skyrocket into different spaces. So could you talk a little bit more about like what you're thinking for the future once that problem might be fixed?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. Because obviously, as a company, we think about that too, right? So there is the immediate issues, like the roadmap for the next few weeks, months, maybe even next couple of years. But then, where are we headed for the future? And we always land at the same answer: it's a universal wallet. Because if you think about the fact that you're tokenizing everything and you're putting your high value items, your investments, and most likely even your identity on chain. Governments are talking about, driver's license being digitized. Even your passport these days has got the chip in it, the NFC chip that gets read. So everything is already digitized. And that will all come together in this kind of, you know, identity kind of wallet that you own is probably going to be on your phone, and that's where you carry everything with you. And so for us as a company that works on a wallet right now, that's what we have in mind is like how do we actually combine all these different elements in a wallet. And that's also why our wallet is called wallet 2, because the first wallet is the one you carry in your pocket. It's the physical wallet. Most people still have one with cards and maybe even fiat cash in it. But then the second wallet is your digital wallet. That's the one that you've got on your phone. And Wallet 2 is positioned to, in the long run, become this kind of universal wallet where you manage your assets, you manage your investments, you have your NFT that represents your car, you have your different kind of access points to your gym, to your loyalty cards. All of that is going to be connected in your universal wallet. And it will entail, for those governments that actually implement the blockchain, you're going to have identity on there, you're going to have your licensing on there, maybe even registrations for different regulatory bodies. So I think in the long run, if we get it right and if the industry gets it right, hopefully a lot of this will be decentralized because I'd much rather live in a decentralized world rather than things being controlled centrally and then governments, making rules that I'm not allowed to leave the country because I don't have the certain thing in my wallet. Um, and so I feel really passionate about the universal wallet, and I feel like that's where at the moment we see some experiments and some first testing phases. But the future will bring a lot of innovation in that space.
Um, a last few questions. Of course, like this is a question I want to ask because I don't also know that much about the tokenization and RWA space, but maybe what are some other misconceptions there are in this field that is very, very important to address? Could
Yeah,
you
it's interesting. It depends on who you're talking to, right? So from a B2B perspective, I'm surprised how often people don't realize that when they're tokenizing something, they are giving away the ownership, right? So if you're tokenizing a diamond, that means you are giving away the diamond for someone else to buy, even though you might still store it because you've got the vault, but the tokenization process changes ownership. And it surprised me that this is not clear. And that again comes back to the education, right? Um, but then the other side, what surprised me as well, is just how it literally is possible to tokenize almost anything. Um, and that's where the creativity comes in, where you can think about, all right, so if we're tokenizing this part of your business, how does it interact with some other parts? And then we add the payment infrastructure and we add that and this, and then you build this new world. And that is the part that I love because you're going beyond just tokenizing a financial asset, putting it into SPV and sell it as a token. You're actually creating something that's different and something that maybe changes industries. And that's really, really fascinating.
could we also talk maybe from the buyer side of tokenized assets as well? Because I mean, there's definitely a lot of conversation about the supply side where people want to tokenize their assets and this and that. On a buyer side, like what are maybe some things you've noticed of buyers of these types of products, be it like institutional buyers, or are retail buyers also very interested in tokenization? How is the market, how is the buyer market for tokenization?
I think generally speaking, it's obviously institutions right now that are driving the market. But what I'm much more interested in is the retail side of things, because that's where, again, the creative side comes in, right? So if you're tokenizing, coming back to the tree, if you're tokenizing the tree, if I'm a buyer, I'm a retail buyer, I want to be able to see like what is out there, what are assets that I identify with, like what's an investment that I personally feel comfortable with doing. And if there is a place where I can go, where I can find these, okay, maybe it's gold, maybe it's the tree, maybe it's diamonds, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's simply equity, you know, if I have all these capabilities in front of me, the choice I can make can be aligned with my own values, and then I can feel passionate about it. And that's the other thing that we're trying to do with our wallets. We want to build an interface for you where you're not only able to make an investment that you feel good about, but you also see what's happening with it. Because if you're investing in a Rolex because you want to do fractional ownership, so you buy, a token of a Rolex that's held somewhere in a custodial vault, you want to be able to see, a picture of it. You want to be able to experience it, show it to your friends. Or if you tokenize your car and you have your entire car's history with like all the mileage on it and the places you've been, maybe you took a picture, you want to be able to show this to your friends and maybe people you meet, and you want to identify with that. I had a conversation with an investor of ours who said, look, I'm retired now. I don't actually need to show people a business card anymore, but sometimes I still want to introduce myself. So what do I give them? And he told me he would love to just show a card with a logo in the background of something that he invested in or something that, he identifies with, because for him, his personality is not his job anymore. It's the things he feels passionate about. It's like, I invest in things, but I have no way to show to people what I'm investing in because it's a very abstract thing to do. And so being able to visualize the investments through an RWA platform for retail or even institutional investors, I think that's something that people don't think about. So when you look at it from a B2C perspective and you want to look at where's the liquidity, who are the buyers, is the people that want to feel passionate about something and that they want to be involved. And so if you invest in farming, you invest in the cattle farm, you want to be able to see pictures, of the farm and how it's going and the growth that's happening and then how they're selling it. So you want to be involved in it. You want to feel like, whoa, this is really cool. I invested in this earlier in this year and now they're, harvesting the crops and selling it to make bread. And maybe you even see a picture of the bread on the farmer's market. How cool is that? And of course you're going to invest again because you want to see how much more bread they're going to make. But if it's just a number on a screen in a PDF, that's boring. And I think that's where RWA can really make it possible for people to actually feel closer, get involved, and see what's happening because you have the on-chain transparency paired with the capabilities of your digital app, where you just go to your phone and you can see, oh, the growth of my tree, because it's been raining a lot, has really accelerated. And you've got GPS data and you've got the growth data. Maybe you can even get soil samples because they are, these telemetry items that allow you to measure in real time what's happening. And being able to bring that to the people, that's going to change things. It's not because you created a token on chain with a tokenization platform that minted an NFT, right? It's how you distribute it, how you visualize it, and what people actually see on their side once they made the investment and how it involves. And then obviously, if you do it again, how it maybe gives you more benefits or more access. Those are the kind of things that I'm really, really passionate about.
So to end this, I have one last question. You mentioned the word passion a lot, and I'm just so happy for this conversation because it's very clear that you're very passionate about tokenization. But I think you're also one of the few ones that were able to really nail down what they're passionate about in Web3. Maybe could you tell us either a story or advice or something about how do you find your passion in blockchain or Web3?
Ooh. I think actually it's talking to people. The big thing that gives me energy is when I can go to conferences, when I go to events, and I can talk to people and hear their stories and also understand what they're struggling with, what the challenges are that they're currently trying to solve, and then obviously hearing the cool stories of what people are doing and the things that they're inventing, what they're working on. And I love going on panels because then you always get insights from other experts and from things that they are thinking about. We had this really cool panel in Singapore, where the question was, if we were all in a massive zoo and RWA is like part of that zoo, which animal would you be and why? And it's like those kind of things that really like stimulate your brain. It's like, oh, hang on, yeah, let me think of something. And I think that's what I really take and what gives me the energy and the passion to then go back to my, office and sit here all day staring at my screen, and still feel passionate about what I do.
Could you maybe give an advice for somebody looking for their passion in Web3? How did you find tokenization as something you're passionate about?
I think it comes down to the vision. Like, find something that you really believe is going to change the world. If you find an idea or a product or a technology that you know this is going to make a difference in the future, or you have a vision for it, or if you have it, it's all about being able to see where you're going. Because if you don't know where you're going, how can you feel passionate about it? It's the same with athletes. If they really want to win this gold medal, they have the vision, they have the goal, they know where they want to go, and that's what then makes you passionate to train every day. Because it's hard. Of course, it's hard to see it stand up and get up every day, go do your routine, whether it's training or coding or doing BD. Routines are always hard and you always have to push yourself. But if you know why you're doing it, if you see the vision, if you believe in the vision, then it's easy because then you know exactly why you're getting up. Then you know exactly why I'm doing another BD call and another conversation where you're always going through the same script or the same answer, same questions. But because if I keep doing this over and over and over again, I will end up at the point that I want it to be.
Florian, this was an amazing talk. We started learning about RWAs and we're ending the talk right now to talking about passion. Thank you so much for your time.